back, Jay. Harden. Bullseye.
Sixers looking very focused in the second half. Maxey looking for more. He's got it!
Daniel House, little up and under on the lob, and then flies in with the emphatic one-hand jam.
Niang looking for more from outside. Bang, bang, George Niang!
Joel, the process heavy.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Pick Swap Podcast. We are entering the NBA Finals. What an incredible Eastern Conference Finals that happened. We're going to be getting there. I think tomorrow sounds about right to me. Thursday.
Yeah.
Thursday. The Stanley Cup starts tomorrow, but it's me and Sean Barnard as usual. Sean, how you doing, man?
Yeah, down to the last 7 games of basketball of this NBA season. So kind of crazy. Heat culture lives on. Wild game that game 7. I did not think the Heat could run away with that in blowout fashion like that. But yeah, shout out Miami Heat. Shout out Jimmy Butler. And I hope they got a fighting chance against the Joker.
Yeah, I'm excited for that series. I think I've been released of all of the bad feelings that I've had about all of these teams. I think Jokic and the Nuggets, they've played fantastic basketball this postseason, and the Heat are doing something really incredible in terms of the way that their roster is built and the guys that are contributing much more than you'd expect them to. So it should be a fun series. Both teams play a pretty pure brand of basketball, a lot of hustle, a lot of defense, a lot of good motion offense. So I'm excited for it, but we got a lot to talk about. The Sixers find their way into national news as they do. While they're not playing, they find a way to make themselves a talking point nonetheless. Nick Nurse, the new head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, and much more to come along the way there. But just initial thoughts, man. Nick Nurse comes in. We've had our fair share of conversations about him. I made a pretty sarcastic comment under one of your tweets saying, I, for one, have never said anything bad about Nick Nurse. I for sure haven't. I've always been a huge fan of his. But Sean, just what are you taking away from this to start?
Yeah, I admire the Sixers' continued bit of just bringing in guys that Joel Embiid seems to hate, whether it is Dan Burke, Andre Drummond. Oh, you go down the list. Nick Nurse is the next man in line there. So, in all seriousness, I do think this is a great signing for the Sixers. This is a good change of pace compared to what they've been through. We've seen plenty of personality managers, guys that are more of the locker room type coaches in Brett Brown and Doc Rivers. Joel Embiid and the Sixers core has never truly had an X's and O's tactician like Nick Nurse. And that's what I'm most excited about. I want to see what he can juice out of this same unit, see what there is left to uncover. He's the best coach was the best coach on the market by a pretty significant margin, I think. So I was happy to see the Sixers go out, be proactive, and go get him. And I'm excited to see what he brings to this team.
Yeah, I was really happy with it. I know we talked, I don't know if it was a week or two ago, we talked about the potential options. He is a guy that was by far, once I kind of digested all of it, by far the number one option in my eyes. And
yeah,
I think seen by the league as definitely the top candidate available. And not only that, he turned down a Milwaukee job, or at least took his name out of the hat for the Milwaukee job. And then, from a report by Woj, took his name out of consideration and, picked the Sixers over the Suns as well. I know there's a lot to unpack there, whether it's his relationship with Daryl Morey that's kind of coming back, or all the other things that kind of led into this. But I think that Nick Nurse was the best available coach on the market. And I think that he, at this point, is the best man for the job. There's a lot of different things, detail-oriented things that he's going to bring to the table that the Sixers just haven't had. I think I said to my dad yesterday, like, he's the antithesis of Doc Rivers. He's everything that Doc was not. And I'm excited to see them react to him in that sense.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think that's true. I still think there's a little more stubbornness to Nick Nurse than I think people are kind of expecting. There's definitely a lot of contrast, and I think it's going to be a necessary and exciting change to see. But there's things like the player development, I don't expect to change that significantly. I've had some Raptors fans push back on me on Twitter saying that it was more a product of the roster and the situation, not necessarily Nick Nurse beliefs. I would love it if that is true and if that is the case. But based on the evidence and his decision making, I mean, Pascal Siakam has led the NBA in minutes the past 2 years. The previous year, he was tied with Fred VanVleet, his teammate, for most minutes per game. VanVleet ranks 6th in the NBA in minutes this year. He's going to play guys a ton. There's going to be a lot of long minutes for these starters. That's probably the biggest thing that's going to continue. That was one of the things that I personally have definitely been critical of Doc Rivers. For reference, James Harden was 5th in the NBA in minutes per game this year. So a guy in that similar conversation. And when you just look around the NBA, taking care of stars is a big thing and making sure they're 100%. There's also, you got to play to your players a little bit. Neither Joel Embiid and James Harden, if he is back, are the type of stars who can just log those type of significant minutes on a nightly basis. They're just not. They don't have the body. They don't have the fitness. They have the injury concerns, however you want to label it. So I do need some sort of understanding there. I do think Tyrese Maxey is probably the guy who gets the reins fully pulled off and does get those kind of minutes. And I'm more okay with that based on his age, his injury trajectory, everything with that. I do think Maxey is going to take a massive leap, sort of in the Fred VanVleet like leap underneath him, and I would love to see that. But yeah, there's a lot to like. The player development, I've been a little more discouraged the more I read into it and trying to find out things. But overall, I'm very excited.
Yeah, I think there's definitely validity to the points that you made there. Like the minutes thing is, you gotta expect him though, like to have a little common sense, right? Like there's no way he's coming in here expecting Joel to play 40 minutes a night in the regular season.
And he was okay with it with Kawhi. He did give Kawhi
right.
They load manage there.
Right. So you got to think it's more circumstantial than anything. And like VanVleet and Siakam are both guys that are in their health primes. VanVleet had some nagging injuries last season, if I'm not mistaken, but he's a guy that, for the most part, when he's playing, is a guy that can log those type of minutes. Like he's not, of the age of James Harden or Joel Embiid, who's had the injury history. Like neither of those guys necessarily have the same stipulations as the players on this team. So I think he's incredibly smart, Nurse. I think he's intuitive enough to hopefully make those decisions based on the roster that he has, not the roster that he used to have. And, there's definitely some guys with the Raptors, and you talk about like Chris Boucher, a guy like that who just kind of came out of nowhere. We know it better than anybody else, right? What he was able to do at times. Yeah, Sixers killer. I think what I'm most excited about with Nurse is that there will be some different things. Like there's just going to be some creativity. There's going to be some adventurous things like a Paul Reed and Joel Embiid front court. Like there's going to be different stuff like that. That's going to get a little bit weird. He's going to test some things out. Like he's going to full court press in game 62 for no real reason, but it might win you a basketball game. Yeah. So like, he's going to do some stuff out of the box. There was a quote from Fred VanVleet. I'm going to find it earlier, but he was he spoke very, very highly of Nick Nurse on a podcast or some sort of interview today. And I don't know. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and you can talk about it, go into it a little bit more. Embiid did meet with Nick Nurse before they finalized everything, right?
Correct. Yeah, Nick Nurse Joel Embiid was a part of the interview process with Nick Nurse and ultimately gave the seal of approval on the decision, which I do like to hear. And I know Daryl Morey talked about how there will be no player involvement in decision making. Joel Embiid deserves to be in those meetings, and frankly, that especially considering the history with Nick Nurse, how there was the little beef there and the public call out and everything. I like to agree on the same page, and I also think it's kind of one of those areas where both guys understand what they're doing. Like as much as Nick Nurse was annoying with that, and he was doing it for strategy. He was doing it to help his team, give his team an advantage. And I think they can see eye to eye on that. I agree on the creativity front. I think that's a big thing. I'm also very curious to see. I think oftentimes Nick Nurse gets, I've seen some criticisms like he only got the championship because of Kawhi, which is, fair. That was one of the most individually impressive stretches of basketball I've seen from any player ever. But to me, the more impressive coaching performances have been the post-Kawhi, him still elevating the floor of that team and keeping that Raptors team, which frankly, I just don't think was that good talent-wise, still a kind of a contender. And even a guy like Pascal Siakam, I've on many occasions called Pascal Siakam Tobias Harris with a permanent green light. I don't think Pascal Siakam is that good. I think it is a credit to Nick Nurse for continuing to develop him, for Siakam to continuing to put the work in. He has gotten better. I will give him props. He has improved. But to me, like the more optimistic outlook is like, look at what he's done with the team without that much talent. And I also think it's cool how they have like a set style of play, a culture, everything like that. The things that the Sixers have kind of been missing, Nick Nurse employs a lot of that. So there's a lot to like.
Yeah, some might even say that Pascal Siakam is Paul Reed with starters minutes.
Mm.
Some have said that in the past. I don't know who it was. Some have said that though. The quote from Fred VanVleet on Nick Nurse during a stadium podcast.
With Shams.
He's going to bring, he's going to bring new ideas, creative ideas. It's going to be a breath of fresh air for them. He's definitely a different guy, but certainly one of the top coaches in the NBA, and we saw that with us winning a championship. I mean, high praise from a guy that's played under him for a long time. Definitely a lot of respect from the point guard there. And like you said, I think it's important. He's a younger coach. He's a guy that's going to have things a certain way, and he might ruffle some feathers. He might push some buttons, but I think that's exactly what they need at this point. And, we mentioned on the last podcast, like Spoelstra obviously is, I think, far and away the best coach currently in the NBA. Been with the Heat for 13 seasons now. Mike Malone has been with the Nuggets for 8. So I think it's important that they went and got a guy that they really trust, a guy that hopefully will kind of dig his heels in here and build, like you said, a good culture, something where he has an expectation and the players that are being brought in or the players that come to Philadelphia meet or exceed that expectation. And you can now work on having, I don't want to talk about Heat culture right now, but you see how strong those type of things can be and how valuable they are in a deep playoff run where like sometimes talent doesn't always get you there, and having a certain expectation of yourself and your teammates does. And I think Nurse, out of all the things, might be on the top of the list at that, as well as like the X's and O's and the tactical movements in a basketball game.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I'd also like to point out in that same interview with VanVleet, he did not close the door on coming to the Sixers, which I did think was noteworthy.
Yeah.
He didn't like say anything super telling, but he did brush. He is a free agent for the record this year. And he did throw it out there in there. He's like, if I'm not on the team next year, then they're an enemy again. So pointing to the Sixers. So you never know. Little tease. It is nice to see former players speaking highly of a coach. I do think that's telling, as much as you can overlook that, and especially because he's a free agent, he's probably being a little extra careful. But it is always good to see like players speaking fondly of a guy after that they have left. So I do think that's a good sign, and especially from a guy like Nick Nurse, which, as you mentioned, is a little bit of a button pusher, is a little bit of a complainer. We will be annoyed at some points for the way he yells throughout games and like that kind of thing. It's cool to see, with all that in mind, that there's still players that like him, support him, and that's, to me, very telling. So I do think this is a home run hire. I also think it's cool to see, like, Daryl Morey was very much brought in because of his connections, because he knows these guys. I think that's a big reason why Nick Nurse is here. I think if this is maybe Elton Brand running that search, things don't shake out this way. And it's cool that we see the Sixers kind of going out and getting where everyone seemed to regard as the premier coaching target. So to me, it's an all positive sign. I don't know if this is catapults us into the championship contending category or anything like that, but I do think this is a great first step and should be taken as that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think, like you said, kind of to go back to something you said earlier, like the Raptors rosters that he's had over the last, 2 or 3 seasons have been like pretty brutal.
Yeah.
And like they had the archetype of player that they loved, which was like the 6'5" to 6'10" small/power forward. And then they just got like 9 of those guys. And then there was Fred VanVleet. And like that was it. So he was not graced with a fantastic roster constructed by them or by any means. He was a coach of the year not too long ago. He won a championship not too long ago. I think in and around the league, was widely considered the best available coach. And I think that a lot of people would put him in the upper echelon of coaches in the league, period, available or not. And again, like he's a young guy, like he's on the younger scale of these NBA coaches as well, which I think is a positive at this point. He's tapped into, like I said, he's not Doc. He's everything that Doc Rivers is. He might be stubborn. He might do some dumb shit here and there, but he's going to try different things. He's going to be active, and like he's going to look like he cares. I've seen so many pictures of him like on the sideline, like in a stance, like screaming, yelling at people. Like we begged for literally 3 full years for Doc to look like he cared at all. And there's a viral clip of him like just like pleading the team to come on, guys. Like that was the best that he could do. You know what I mean? So it's gonna be a kick in the ass, which is the best possible thing. I'm excited for it. I was happy for it. Again, I was for sure on the record of disliking this guy in the past, but sometimes those are the best guys to have on your team, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a PJ Tucker type thing. Like, you didn't want to play him. You love to have him. You didn't want to, have to go against Nick Nurse because he was going to throw the entire kitchen sink at Joel Embiid and make life difficult for him. Now, tell me about that as well. How much do you factor in, like, he's a coach that played Joel in the playoffs and had some relative success trying to slow him down? Obviously, he didn't successfully do that. Joel had a fantastic series the most recent time they played the Raptors, but he has experience in a playoff situation going against Joel. Do you think that's important when you're looking at what that's going to bring come next year's playoffs?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And we're going to get into a larger conversation about Joel in a little bit here. But one of the things that I think is, first off, one of the things that's the biggest thing from the Sixers perspective in the initial report from Woj was that Nurse sold the Sixers on a vision centered around Joel Embiid. And I get, on one hand, it's obvious, like, the best player in the franchise and the MVP of the NBA should be the centerpiece of an offense and centerpiece of a team. But it doesn't seem as simple as that, as it kind of is made out to be. Like, there's been all the conversations about, like, can you win with a big man? And we're kind of going to, I guess, tear that Band-Aid off in a minute. But I do think it's cool that he's like that. And I guess where the shortcomings of Joel can really be identified is still in his, like, processing of getting to his spots, especially in the playoffs when things slow down. That's where he seems to be still hitting that wall. Nick Nurse, better than anyone, is going to be able to prepare him for, like, looks that he's going to see come playoff time. I do think that's valuable. And this Sixers team has had multiple clashes against this Raptors team. There's been many times where throughout Joel's continued progression, like, Nick Nurse has pretty much battled against all the versions of Joel Embiid. So I think it's cool to have that on our side now. He's done one of the better jobs defending him of any coach around the NBA. So yeah, I think this is all great to have on our sideline and on the Sixers perspective. And you can't really, like, quantify that as far as value when we talk about when we get to playoffs next year. If Joel Embiid looks like a different player, it could very well be because he's more prepared, and that's a credit to Nick Nurse. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I thought that was at least it's something to note. At least, it's hard to tell what that may bring, or how they may go about, changing his style of play, or at least tweaking it, or whatever Nick Nurse is going to bring to the table there. It's just important to have a guy that's been there. He was kind of like the architect behind a team that started to show other teams how to attack Joel, how to play him defensively, how to make life difficult for him. And in doing that, having built a defensive scheme to do that, you have to have recognized the holes in that defensive scheme, hoping that he wouldn't notice it. In that, in the flip side, you now see, okay, Joel, here's what they're going to do. Here's how I would have broken my own defense there. Here's how, you know what I mean? Like, there's that thought process behind it. And I do think that is at least worth noting when you're bringing him in. Again, it's not the end all be all. To me, that thought process kind of sounds like the Al Horford signing, where it was like, oh, we have a guy that, could always stop Joel. Now he's on our team, right? It's not a guaranteed, like, win. It's not a guaranteed this is going to happen. We have this guy. So, you know what I mean? But it is going to be a positive in that sense, where I think Joel will benefit from at least having a guy that's been on the other side before. But I just didn't know how much weight you put into it totally.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something to note. I honestly think I probably weigh it even a little more heavier than you do when talking like that. I think it's very important. I think that there's really, like, maybe 2 to 3 other guys in the entire league who can have that level of, like, preparedness, like, that kind of mindset for, let's see who Joel is. Like I said, Nick Nurse has watched the evolution of Joel Embiid in the same way many of us has, and he's done it on the opposite sidelines and figuring out ways to stop it. So I think that's a huge asset. And yeah, it is big that Joel signed off on it so they can let bygones be bygones. And to swing things a little bit with Joel here, so we kind of have teased this conversation, almost brought it up. I personally hopped on to record by myself to kind of bring this conversation for a while and haven't really quite got the words right. So I would like to put it out. I am a Joel Embiid guy. I love that he is the face of the Sixers. However, the shortcomings of this franchise for sure are directly tied. And I guess what I'm getting at is, in the modern NBA, where there's so little margin for error, it's extremely hard to build around a big man. Where's your mindset on where Joel is as far as, can you win with Joel Embiid as the grade A number 1 guy for this franchise?
Yeah, I mean, yes, to me still, I think it's actually like a resounding yes. I think the difference is in how he goes about being the number 1 guy, right? To me, like, we touched on this briefly, and I know you're going to have probably a much different, maybe not much different view from me, but a differing view, at least marginally there. But Joel's going to have to buy into being a different type of player, at least when the playoffs come around. I hope that it's something that they start to breathe into the offense and defense throughout the season and try to phase into something new with him. He can still be the number one scorer on the team. He can still be the offensive hub, but he's going to have to figure out how to tweak it to be a more willing and decisive passer, to be a more willing and decisive fast break transition player. Obviously that's difficult for him size wise and speed wise, but like willing to give up his offensive possessions to then push on that side. Obviously it all comes down to his defense and what he brings on that end. But I think as a player, absolutely, his mindset is going to have to shift, and that's going to be the question mark going into next season. And why I think the Nick Nurse signing was so important, and why I'm excited about it is because I think if there was somebody that can pitch him on, being that type of player and trusting that, it could be Nick Nurse. But in my opinion, may it be jaded or not, yes, I think the answer is still yes.
Yeah, I think you hit on a great point there. We want to look back at the Doc Rivers system. That Doc Rivers system was perfect for bringing Joel Embiid to be MVP.
Yeah.
It was not perfect for winning an NBA championship. It's just not the most efficient offense for it to give Joel the ball at the elbow and the other four guys just stand around and watch. The best case scenario of that was like maybe he can get to the rim, usually not because there's typically four other guys packed in the paint behind Joel's primary defender. And typically the shot would be Joel's pull-up mid-range jumper, which, again, he can hit that. That's great. That absolutely should be an option. That can't be the go-to every play, which it basically was under Doc Rivers. And I think there needs to be – I think this offseason, and we talked about this too, how Joel went from the highs of the high to winning MVP, finally getting that award, to the lows of the low of really catching the most blame that he ever has for a postseason exit. And fair or not, you can call up a million reasons, but he does have to look himself in the mirror and have some real reflection to say, what is the best version of myself to bring this team to a championship? Because I just don't think it is Joel Embiid leading the NBA in scoring. I don't think it is him scoring 33 points per game. And I think him getting better is not necessarily correlated to stats in the way that we've looked at. Like, it's great he's taken these strides forward, has become the best scorer in the league, done all these things. Maybe the best version of Joel is a guy who's scoring 27 points per game and 14 rebounds and being more dominant defensively. And I think that's the conversation that needs to be had. I hope Nick Nurse is the guy to make him willing to do that. And I don't want to do this. I'm a Joel Embiid guy, but you can really make an argument that he is a loser. You can really, James, who's the best individual player that Joel Embiid has ever beaten in the playoffs?
Yeah, I don't even want to think about it.
Bradley Beal is probably my answer there. That's probably the best individual player that he's beaten. Who's the best team that do you think he's beaten in the playoffs? I think it's probably go ahead.
I was just say maybe that first run against Miami.
Okay. I was gonna give
maybe
it
2018.
I was gonna give it to the Nick Nurse Raptors, was probably what I recognized.
Okay, that's fair.
None of these are great. None of these are hanging on the refrigerator. I can't believe I accomplished that. So I guess when I get to these postseason shortcomings, give me your reaction to all of that. Tell me on it.
No, I see where you're coming from. I absolutely do. I understand at least the thought process behind that. In my eyes, you've gotten to the point like the cap is very sealed shut to where they currently are. Joel Embiid, as he is capped, right? It's that second round. Talent wise, they always can get through that first round because they're sitting atop the Eastern Conference and they play a lesser opponent. When you get to an equal or better opponent, at least roster wise, they haven't tactically been good enough to get through that portion of it, right? He's had, you have years where it became a wash. The bubble year became a wash. You have other circumstances and a lot of things I think have played into it. Not enough for him to just get a pass. Obviously, like it does come down to him a lot. I think what we're seeing with him now is, okay, you got what you wanted. You have a very James Harden, whether you like him or not, was fantastic at certain points in that series. He carried you to victories at certain points in that series. Ben Simmons is no longer around. There's nobody else to really like take the brunt of this blame. And the eyes are now turning to Joel saying, okay, you are now the sole common denominator here. You're the only one that has outlasted the losses.
Yeah.
Right? It's now time for you to either figure it out or we all kind of accept that this is just who you are. And I hope that there's some self-reflection. There's some, there's an organizational change again that now can twist them into figuring out how to change his style of play, his game to be conducive to winning in the playoffs. And I want to give you credit, Sean. You had said this in years past about him having to change his style of play, and maybe the 30-point per game thing isn't going to work forever. He got his MVP, right? He got his shine. He got his thing. He absolutely well deserved. I was so happy for him. I wish that it didn't go out as bad as it did because it outweighs the incredible feat that was the MVP. Mm-hmm. But now it's time for him to look himself in the mirror and say, like, if I'm really serious about wanting to win a championship like I say I am, how do I help a team get there? Because I'm seeing how everyone else is doing it, and he should be able to do it.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. And I do believe Joel Embiid's capable. I do believe, but there are changes that he needs to make. And that literally starts with him like looking himself in the mirror and realizing that. And that's a lot easier said than done for a guy who has these habits engraved in his game, and his sweet spots, his familiarities, the things that he wants to do kind of have to change a little bit. And I do think coaching is the biggest thing with that. Like I said, the offense to me is going to look drastically different under Nick Nurse. Just more movement. Just even if it's you give it to Joel at the elbow and there's a back cut coming back screen and another guy going around on the other side, it's like that can look way different and produce way better results as a team.
Yeah.
So there's things that can be done. I'm not saying that he was the best basketball player in the world this year. He's got all the talent in the world. It just has to be pieced together a little better. The other thing that I did want to bring up still on this point is I still, as much as we can point to X and O's, all that, I do think there's something to a championship DNA. And when you look at I know you hate the Heat culture stuff, but you look at Jimmy Butler and the will to win and that kind of mindset, it's clear that has an impact, and that's infectious to other guys. I don't think Joel has that, and I'm not saying in a way that he can't win, but I don't think he has the let me carry these guys on my shoulders in the way that you hope your star does. And that's definitely compatible. We've seen plenty of best players not have that in them. That's why you have a PJ Tucker, why you have other guys. But it's also a delicate balance that you have to strike. And the guy that I kind of know doesn't have it is James Harden. And that's where I think it's hard when you're building this team, that you look at it from a basketball standpoint. James Harden is necessary to this team, but it's also now you're giving a guy. I don't think Joel has that infectious winner alpha mentality, but I also don't think he has loser energy. I think James Harden's got a little bit of loser energy. And when you kind of combat that to me is a bad recipe. So do you think that's a thing, first off, that kind of championship DNA? And where do you think James Harden ties into all that?
So I think the weird part about Joel with in this case scenario is there's been so many times where he is intense and he is emotional and loud and in your face and wants to win very badly. Even just I feel I look at the Raptors series that they did win. He was in there, man. He was aggressive and strong and things were going well. You know what I mean? I feel once they get the win taken out of them, they have such a hard time bringing it back. To me, you look at Eric Spoelstra and the way, and again, it's hard to compare. It's such a different situation, obviously. But when they lost Game 6 in arguably the most devastating way at home, Eric Spoelstra sat at the podium and said, "I wish we could tip Game 7 right now, right now, right now." He said, "We just got out of the locker room. We want to tip off right now." And that's the difference. You know what I mean? That's a difference in the way that they go about their day-to-day basis. To me, it was once the win was taken out of the Sixers' sails, there was 0% chance that they're getting it back. And it's just the way it works. You look at the Nets series this year, Joel did play that way. Joel was very open to giving the ball up, moving the ball. They knew they were going to throw guys at him. He was not only willing, but he was aggressive on the defensive end. You wonder how much the injury played into it. So maybe that is what it all comes down to. And I know we can't keep doing that, right? We can't keep giving the pass of okay, you got to be healthy at some point. It's a negative factor of yours if you can't stay healthy, but that's a big deal. No, but I agree with you, man. there is just something about them. And the weird thing is, and people will look at it from an outside perspective and not be able to realize it, but every Sixers fan knows the pit, like the feeling in the pit of their stomach watching them play basketball when they just don't have it.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to find it.
Yeah.
And that feels like a James Harden thing. It feels like a Joel Embiid thing. And like that feeling is so helpless and gross because like then you're like, I want it more than the guy playing on the court does. And that's such a devastating, helpless feeling. And it does, at times you're looking at it and you're like, what the hell? But that is a culture thing for sure. That is an expectation, like I had mentioned earlier. And I hope, the hope is at this point that like Joel guys, he has to keep that aggressiveness and that enthusiasm for the game, but it also has to be pushed from a top-down perspective. So I don't know if I answered your question at all, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I thought you brought up a lot of good points, and I thought that was all well said. That's the frustrating part about it to me is we've seen it. We've seen moments where Joel has that look in his eye where he refuses to lose, and he'll do whatever is possible, dominating on both sides. But there is absolutely those games where it's like, who cares? Like, well, let's get through the 48, and it sucks. Like that can't happen. And Harden is a guy specifically. And this is I think we're gonna keep doing this dance throughout. What are the reports? Where is he going for a couple more weeks now at the minimum? Like I've never seen that out of him. And even when he has his 42-point performance and 45-point performance and literally wins the Sixers 2 playoff games, and even like he was on his best behavior, he's talking about everybody go back to the locker room. Like we've only won one game. Like he's doing his best, but it's not natural. That's not him. He doesn't have that like grinder thing. I do think Joel needs a guy like that. And like PJ Tucker, God bless him. I'm grateful he's here, all that. Like it just can't be a guy who averages 3.2 points per game doing that. And again, shout out PJ Tucker because he showed up when he matters. He's absolutely important to be here from a culture standpoint, but it kind of has to start with your stars. And when we talk about having a culture, like Joel Embiid has outlived all these guys. He is the culture. He is all these things. And if it's not quite the right mix, like it kind of sucks. And I don't know exactly how to fix it. And I think, honestly, it's an even more difficult thing to figure out than like the basketball pairings.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely I think that's the crux of the issue right now. It is kind of like the centerpiece of where the Sixers and Sixers fans are and why so many people are hesitant to believe that they can get back to wherever, they might be. But I don't know. I believe in Joel. The thing is, I do believe that fire and intensity is there. I don't know what it was this year. Because even in years past, it felt like when they lost, he was devastated. I mean, obviously the Raptors series where they lost against Kawhi and that whole thing, he was obviously, very upset. But like even the bubble year, even the year after, like it felt like things really like hurt him, and it didn't feel as much this year. I don't know what that is. That's a disappointing, realization to have. I really do believe that, it'll go back to him being the way that he normally is, but it's hard to say. It is like when you bring it up and you put it that way, it does suck.
All right, I'll swing a little more positive closure here. I didn't prep you for this, so I'll give you my thoughts here. I've been bouncing around this. I think the Sixers are in a better spot as a franchise than the Boston Celtics.
Ooh, that's fun.
Yeah.
That's a fun one.
Let me take you through. So we just saw the Celtics lose to the Miami Heat in Game 7. Obviously, they made it around past the Sixers. They beat the Sixers, not by very much. Like, I get it. The Sixers lost. It was close. Looking ahead, the Sixers, who knows what happens with James Harden still. They just got Nick Nurse as a head coach, who I think will walk in and is immediately a better head coach than Joe Mazzulla. The Celtics are in win now mode completely with a guy who is in his second head coaching job ever. His only other head coaching experience is at a Division II school, no disrespect, in West Virginia. He's young. He doesn't have it. He's figuring it out as he goes. They have Jaylen Brown seeking the Supermax deal, kind of fighting with Jason Tatum, and also had 8 turnovers in Game 7. I do think that there's a growing rift between Tatum and Brown as far as where this goes. And they're kind of at that ceiling as a team. They don't have a young guy. Like, who's their developmental project getting better? There's really no one. It's Tatum and Brown's the core. One of them might want out. The Sixers still have the Tobias Harris salary, which it's either for a trade or maybe they eat him for the year and you open $40 million next year. They still have Tyrese Maxey, who's gotten significantly better year in and year out. You even look at, if I want to throw the Milwaukee Bucks in this, they got Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez as free agents. Who knows what happens? But if either of those guys leave, that's a huge hit to their team and a huge change in the way they play basketball. The Sixers, for the most part, have the core in place, still have a fighting chance. And I guess like when I look around the league a little bit, I feel a little bit better about the Sixers is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I was just say I feel like the last portion there definitely brought me back in. The Sixers, I think, ended so poorly this year, and they looked so brutal that it was very easy to just like forget about the rest of the league and the outlook of that. And then you see the Celtics go out pretty sad. And that core has been together now for 6 seasons. Does that sound right? Like 6 years.
About that, yeah.
I mean, they played the Eastern Conference Finals against LeBron in 2018, right? So like this is basically the same team. Obviously, they had a breakup and a get back together with Al Horford and whatever else has kind of transpired with them there. But yeah, they're hitting a pretty solid ceiling right now. Obviously, like Tatum and Brown together. Got to imagine that they continue to roll that pairing out. I don't see how you just like let Jaylen Brown walk.
Yeah,
But
so that's where I'm at is I can't see the Celtics not offering that Supermax, and I can't see Jaylen Brown not accepting it, and I can't see him spending the length of the contract in Boston is pretty much my feeling on it. Now, in one hand, you can look at that positively and say, well, we can catch a haul and a trade for him. Who knows? Maybe it's for Anthony Simons in the 3rd pick or whatever for sending to Portland, something like that. So there's things you can do for sure. But we're talking about if they give both these guys the Supermax, which they're both eligible for and will command, that's 60% of the salary cap starting in 2023. That's your team. That's more 2/3, whatever. Like that's a significant portion. So I'm kind of like looking at that track, and a friend of mine's a big Boston fan. I texted with him a little bit specifically after last night to rub it in. They're freaking
for sure.
out. And that like I made me feel a little watching this Boston just mindset unravel made me feel a little bit better about the Sixers, I guess.
Absolutely. It definitely brought me back in a little bit, saying like, it's not always peaches and cream for everybody. It does get bad on other sides as well. But to your point, I think the Sixers have a brighter outlook than people are really considering right now. They have a young, like Tyrese Maxey is the young guy. I'm sure he'll get extended here. If it's not this season, it'll be next. Or I guess it would have to be either this summer or next summer, depending whether it's Tobias Harris getting moved this year or them opening up that contract next year. They are in a bit of a limbo with James Harden. Like, what do? You are in that little space, and we'll see what happens there. But yeah, seeing the Celtics kind of implode there, like Horford's obviously super old and clearly not very good anymore. Tatum is very good, but like he looked bad at times during the entire playoffs. He obviously looked great in other games. Brown looked. Honestly, it was like it was them against the Heat. Like Brogdon sucked against the Heat. Derek White was obviously very good, but like Brown was pretty bad. Tatum had pretty bad games. Horford was brutal. And they feel like they're falling apart a bit. Joe Mazzulla is a clown. So it's kind of all just falling apart for them, which is nice to see. And it's full disclosure. Like I'm a hater. People are gonna like comment, whatever. Like I hate them. And so me rejoicing and relishing in their failures is make it what you want it to be. It's what I'll do. So you're not gonna get that change out of me. Full disclosure there. But yeah, I think the Sixers are in a much better can be in a much better spot. They're going to have to do some fancy footwork this offseason, but I think they're in a pretty good spot going into next season. One of my coworkers asked me last night, he texted me and he was like, how in are you for the Sixers next year? I was like, bro, I'm always in on the Sixers. You're never going to get me not in on the Sixers. So, ask me today, ask me in October, ask me next February, ask me next playoffs. Like I'm going to be in on them regardless. So you're not going to get me to switch up too quick.
Yeah, and this is the first step was Nick Nurse. They still have a lot of work to do this offseason. I think they smashed step 1 on the to-do list, the what needs to be done. So let's see where they go from here. So I wouldn't say I'm all the way back in. I'm still frustrated with this team.
For sure.
Still have a little bit of shaking off the whatever I still feel from that playoff loss. But the Nick Nurse signing is a step in the right direction. There's a lot more work to do. So this was a little bit of an up and down episode. We were all over. Yes, I had some highs and lows, but you got any final thoughts, James?
I think we're good. I think it's good to set this off, watch the finals, kind of chill out here, and we'll get into the real gritty portion of the offseason coming up here soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate all you guys for tuning in. Make sure to drop a like on this video, subscribe on the channel, drop your comments. Let me know if you think Sixers are in a better spot than the Celtics, if Joel Embiid's a winner, all that stuff, all that good stuff. I want to hear from you. So appreciate it and talk to you next time.